Hey, what's up? It's PDX Guitar Freak, and in this video I'm going to show you a lead guitar tone that I've created for the Line 6 Helix. If you like it, you want to try it out, you can find it on the Line 6 Custom Tone website. I will put a link directly down below where you can go right to the download page. Now, a couple other things I want to mention up front that are really important. Obviously, there are a lot of factors that are going to go into how this patch sounds when you use it. One of them is the guitar that you're using, okay? So for this particular video, the sound clips you heard at the beginning and you're going to hear throughout, I'm using my newest guitar. It's a ESP USA M2 with a pair of Seymour Duncans. In the bridge position, we have the Duncan Custom model, and in the neck, we have a Duncan 59. Now, I want to give a special shout out to Christian over at Sweetwater for helping me obtain this guitar. I'd never worked with Sweetwater before, and I was very impressed with Christian's customer service, the follow-through, how fast everything happened, very painless, not what you would expect from a big online retailer. So I'm going to put Christian's information, his contact info down below also, where you can contact him should you want to buy anything from Sweetwater. Tell him PDX Guitar Freak sent you. And it's also important that I call out, I am using a couple of impulse responses, or IRs for short, in this patch. And if you're not familiar with impulse responses, you can find out a lot about them on the web, but a lot of people use them within the Helix. And they're basically audio files that contain the kind of sonic characteristics of a particular piece of gear, in this case, speaker cabinets. And so these are third-party developed impulse responses that recreate the sound of classic speaker cabinets. And a lot of people use these with the Helix because the speaker cabinet models that are built into the Helix just aren't that great. And the ones that I purchased and I'm using here are from 3 Sigma Audio. I have no affiliation with them. I've actually bought some from Ownhammer and I thought those were great too, but for this particular patch, I really like the 3 Sigma Audio. I'll put a link down below to where you can purchase those. I believe they're about $6 or $7 a piece, so you'd end up spending 13, 14 bucks if you want to get the exact sound I have here. Now, if you don't want to use the third-party IRs, just remove these and put in some of the speaker cabinets that come with the Helix of your choice. Again, I really wanted to provide you guys with a patch that included some of the built-in speaker cabinets, but again, I'm just not happy with the built-in speaker cab, so I'm just going to be honest with you and I'm going to share with you what I prefer. Okay, so the first thing you might notice when you open up this patch is that there are 2 completely separate paths, and I say separate because they're not linking with one another, that the guitar is going through. I'm going to call them the top path and the bottom path. And they're very similar. They've got some similar components, but some that are different and very important to call out, and I'll go through each component. So the first thing we have in both of them is a noise gate, which is always on. Okay, they're set up slightly different because the top path is a little bit noisier. The one thing you're going to pay attention to there that you might want to modify is the threshold knob. Okay, so as you turn that up or turn it to the right, it's going to increase the amount of noise suppression. However, the downside to that is the more you turn that up, you also end up sucking away some of the original tone, which impacts your sustain and a little bit of the high end. So you want to find the right balance with that threshold knob. I've found that somewhere between 65 and 55, minus 65 and minus 55 is usually a good place for me. It's the right balance between noise suppression and, tone sucking, as I call it. You want to keep that as low as possible, though. After that, you'll notice that the path on both the top and the bottom, it kind of loops off. All right, and there's two components within that loop. Now, I'm using that little loop feature differently than most people do. Most people use it to kind of bypass a certain area of the patch or link one part to another, but I'm just using it in kind of a cheating way to add 2 more components to the path, or else we run out of room. So what we've got going on is in both the top and the bottom, first we have an overdrive. And in the top, we're using the TS-808, which is based on the classic Ibanez Tube Screamer. And on the bottom, we're using the deranged master, which is based on a Rangemaster overdrive unit. And there are some similarities in the way that I've set them up, in that the drive is all the way down and the level is all the way up. The driver gain is all the way down, the level's all the way up. And what that does is that just provides a little bit more distortion on top of what you already have, but it provides a thicker, more sustaining tone. And this concept, I won't call it a trick, but this concept of keeping the gain on an overdrive unit all the way down and the level all the way up, and you can do it on a distortion pedal too, is something that I've used with real gear too. And it's a trick that I learned, or it's a thing that I learned many years back from reading an interview back in the 80s with, I think it was Jakey Lee, who talked about using an overdrive unit in this way. And it's just a great way when you've already got a good bass distortion sound to just add a little bit more and thicken up the tone. So give it a try with real pedals too sometime. After that, in both paths, we go into a parametric EQ. And the EQ is set up kind of similarly. There's a couple things going on. First, on the top path, we have a low frequency cut centered at 250 hertz. This is going to take out some of the woofiness. Then you've got a 3 decibel boost at 1.0, centered at 1.0, which is going to give you a nice little mids boost. And then you have a 1.5 decibel boost at centered at 7 kilohertz, which is going to give you a little more crispness into the mix. And then we've got the low cut set at 80 hertz to take out that very, very low end, which you don't need, and a high cut at 15 kilohertz to take off very, very, very high top end. On the bottom path, very similar, except for the low frequency, we're cutting it at 180, and the rest should be pretty comparable. After that, that little loop feature, it joins back up to the regular path, and in both cases we've got a phaser. And the phaser is set up almost identically. It's a little bit more prominent on the top path, and the phase is set up for a very subtle phase. It's not meant for a big washy, swashy phase. If you want that, then you probably want to put it behind the amp in the speaker cabinet. But putting it up front like this gives it a more subtle effect, and it's actually something that you may have heard me talk about in past videos when I was doing my HD 500 videos. It's a Van Halen thing. He used to use that MXR Phase 90 a lot in the early days in particular, just to give a little bit more color and texture to the sound. So it's optional, but for me, it's an important part of the overall tone. Okay, now I'm going to play a little bit without the phaser, and then I'm going to play the same notes with the phaser. And you're going to notice that the phaser is going to be a little bit more prominent when I'm playing on the lower strings, especially when I'm palm muted. So first let me play some low strings palm muted so you can hear how that sounds. Now I'll play on the upper strings, the higher strings, and you'll hear that the phaser is not as prominent. So first, here's without the phaser, and then I'll play it with the phaser. After that, we go into the amp, and on the top path, we're using the Line 6 2204 mod, which is supposed to be a modified version of Marshall JCM 800, which was a very classic, staple Marshall amp of the 1980s. And on the bottom path, we have the standard Brit 2204 based on the standard Marshall JCM 800. And I won't go through all of the different components within, but a couple things worth calling out. In both cases, I've got the bass down pretty low because I found that the Helix has a lot of unnecessary low end, so you want to, especially for lead, you want to keep the bass pretty low. Mids are pretty high. Sag and bias, I tend to keep the sag and the bias up a little bit. And what that does is it gives the tone a little bit more sustained, makes it a little more spongy, better for lead. So in general, if I'm playing rhythm, I take the sag and the bias and I bring them down, which gives you a tighter sound, and I turn them up when I want more of a spongy, loose, liquidy sound for lead. Now the expression pedal is set up to control the gain on both of the amps. So in the standard position, the modified 2204 is at 4.5 and the standard 224 is at 8. As you step down on the expression pedal, it will increase the gain in the modified up to 7 and in the standard one to 10. So you might want to experiment with that. And I just do that, I kick that in with the expression pedal when I just want a little bit more hair on the solo. After that, we go into the impulse responses, or the speaker cabinet models. And on the top, we've got a Marshall 1960s 412 And on the bottom, we've got a high watt 412, also from kind of the same period. And again, I'll put a link down below to which particular 3 Sigma Audio IRs I'm referring to. Now, if you don't want to use the third-party IRs, just remove these and put in some of the speaker cabinets that come with the Helix of your choice. After that, we go into a parametric EQ again, and on the top, we've got another cut at that 250 hertz frequency, so you're going to be cutting away at that very low frequency again. You've also got a boost at 2.9 kilohertz. So those are kind of, I guess you could call them high mids. Gives a little more crunch into the mix. Then we've got the low cut at 80 hertz and the high cut at 10 kilohertz. On the bottom path, we've got the a parametric EQ. Again, we've got a cut at the 160 hertz, so very low, the kind of very low frequencies, cutting those out. We've got a 1.5 kilohertz boost, so we've got some nice mids added in again. We've also got the 2.9 kilohertz boost for some more crunchy higher end mids, and then the low cut at 80 hertz again, and the high cut at 11 kilohertz. And then on the top we have a chorus, and this is set up for a very subtle effect. I've got the speed all the way down and the depth all the way up. So kind of similar to what we did with the overdrives, and I've done this again with real pedals too. By keeping the speed all the way down and the depth all the way up, you're not adding a big washy chorus sound, you're just adding a little more depth to the sound. Again, this is an optional one. You can take it or leave it. And then after that, we have a compressor. And we're using the LA Studio comp. And I got this trick from, I've seen a couple people on YouTube use it with their Helix patches. They use it quite a lot. And I liked what it does. It basically just kind of smoothens out the sound overall. So it's not really, you're not using it to kind of limit things or highly compress anything. You're just kind of smoothing the sound, if that makes sense. And I feel like it has less of an impact on the tone than it does on the feel, if that makes sense. It just feels better when I have these kicked in. Like the guitar responds better, if that makes sense. It just feels a little more smooth and even. And sometimes people will put this at the very end of everything, but I don't like it at the very end. I don't want to use it. I don't want to impact the delay and the reverb, which are coming next. And then we go into the delay on the top path, which is set for a 386 millisecond repeat, one repeat, pretty basic. And on the bottom, we've got the cave reverb. And this is set for a rather subtle, kind of mellow, warm reverb, not a big reverb either. And you'll notice that the delay and the reverb, they're on separate paths. And this is a technique, the separation of the two, that is, that I picked up from someone else, because usually I have the delay going into the reverb, like reverberating the delay, right? But I have someone on YouTube, I think it might have been the Helix channel, I can't remember, one of those guys that was doing that, and I really liked the net result, so I've tried it and I'm sticking with it for now. Now I have another patch that I'm going to share with you guys here. It's almost identical. The primary changes, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but the primary changes are that I'm using the same speaker cabinet on both paths. It's the Marshall 1960s replica, the 3 Sigma Audio IR. And I'm also using the chorus on both paths. A couple other minor changes other than that, but otherwise it's probably maybe less aggressive type of tone. You might like this one better, so check it out too. Alright, well, there you go. That was my first patch that I've shared with you guys for the Line 6 Helix, a lead guitar tone. I hope to have more to share with you in the future. If you have a Helix, I'd love to get your feedback on this patch, what you'd do differently. In fact, if you end up taking this patch and making some changes to it, I'd love to hear it. So if you want to post it on the Line 6 website or somewhere else where myself and others can get it for free, that would be really cool, and I'll give you a shout out in a future video. Alright, until next time, rock on.